idea about, getting fast? Like, I mean, when did you have that consciousness that, I mean, you had to get it fast in the undergrad?
Before university, I've always been the same though, like throughout like all of my academic career, like even GCSEs, I had to get A stars, A levels, I had to get A stars. And then whenever I came to university, I kept knowing I needed first. So I think like a part of it is like a small part of it's quite like a silly thing where it's just I'm the youngest of all of my family. So I just wanted to beat everyone else who came before me. But then another part of me was like, it's so much money and it's so many years. And I think I would have felt like I'd wasted so much time had I just come out and got like a 2-2 or a 2-1. Even though I know that's not true, but it's just like I wanted to do as well as I possibly could.
No, I mean, it always intrigues me. Like when I went to university, I never thought about, like I had to get just like, I was terrible in the first year, second year, and then, in the third year, you got kind of, understanding, I mean, what the hell am I doing? But it's still, like if I went back to see those memories, I think we're not thinking much about, future or career or anything, just.
I think like I think it's quite different for me because I went to a grammar school. So like grammar schools here are still all free, but you have to sit an exam to get into them. So I've been sitting exams and being told you have to get, because my school, the way it worked was you had to stay above a certain like grade average to continue on at that school. So for the first 3 years you had to get a certain amount of A's and B's to stay on to GCSE, and then you had to get a certain amount of A's and B's at GCSE to continue to A level, and the same at AS level to get to A2. So like from the age of 11, it's just been you have to succeed. That's just how I'm built. Like I think grammar school education very much tells you like you have to do well and you have to like academically succeed, and that's all that matters. Like I think
so. It's kind of training. You are well trained. So, so like when you moved to like grammar school, so obviously you were in a different school before that.
Yeah.
I mean, how old were you then?
You start secondary school at 11. So we were doing the transfer test, because I don't think they do it anywhere else in the UK, but they do in Northern Ireland. You do the transfer test. My primary school was quite intense. You started in primary 6. So the second semester of primary 6, you'd start doing practice tests. And then you would do practice tests over the summer. And then you would do a weekly test every week in primary 7, your final year, until you sat the exams in November and January. And then that was kind of how that went. So I was about 9, 10 maybe whenever we started doing exams. It doesn't sound great whenever I say it out loud.
I mean, did it affect your childhood?
I mean, yes, because I'm dyslexic. So I was stressed constantly because I wasn't very good at maths at all. Like it was not something I was very good at. My brother was really good at it. He was really scientific and mathematic, and I was not. But like whenever I was younger, I really struggled with reading and stuff because like I am dyslexic, but they didn't know it then at the time. So I always found spelling and stuff. Like there was the transfer test was split into two. It split into mathematics and English. And the English part I could not spell. I still can't spell very well now, but back then it was awful. Like I was so stressed so often about those exams. So I would probably say yes, it probably did affect me quite badly, because like the school never diagnosed me with dyslexia, because I was smart enough that I was fine. But I was just constantly stressed. The thing is though, my parents didn't really put much pressure on me. They just kind of said like, because there's like in Northern Ireland, schools are split up between Protestant and Catholic schools. So you have the Protestant grammar school and the Protestant state school, and then you have the Catholic grammar school and the Catholic state school. So there were about 50 schools I could have gone to. So it didn't matter. I would have ended up at a good school regardless, because there are too many.
Wow.
But so there was one school. There was like they're usually split up between boys' schools and girls' schools as well. We don't have a lot of integrated schools. At least the grammar schools are kind of all split. They're not anymore, but they were whenever I was younger. So there were two schools. There was the Protestant grammar school for boys that my brother and my cousin had went to, and then there was the grammar school for girls that all the other girls in my family had gone to. I wanted to go to, and all my friends were going there as well. So all my friends, like I just happened to have ended up with all really smart children, which probably wasn't great for me. I really wanted to go to the same school that all my friends were going to and my whole family had gone to. My parents were like, it's fine, you can go wherever you want, but I think I put that pressure on myself a lot to go to the school that everyone else went to. Like I didn't want to be the one person going to a different school.
Looking back at your, like, especially with this grammar school, the people you were with during your time there, like, I mean, your year mates, I mean, where they are now, I mean, it looks like, you know, this school provides, you know, excellent education, and the chances are students can thrive.
Well, most of them are all they're all graduating this year. Like I think over, like my school, by A levels, over 80% of us end up at university. So all of them went to university. Like all of them did law and engineering and becoming doctors and stuff like that. So most of them are going to graduate schools now. So they're all either in a job, like they're all engineers or they're lawyers or they're doctors, or they're going into higher education again, like they're going into postgraduate education.
No, I'm just like trying to see, like, you know, throughout my career, I studied, you know, United Nations, you know, post-conflict, you know, all those things. You know, it looks like, I mean, when you talk about Northern Ireland post-conflict society, I mean, and if you compare these with like Afghanistan post-conflict society, just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel like well, like that was kind of one of the things about us. It's like the schooling situation in Northern Ireland is terrible, but not because we don't have schools, but because the schools refuse to integrate and they refuse to have cross-community education. That's not really a thing that occurs. They don't want, like, the Catholic schools don't want the boys' Catholic schools and the girls' Catholic schools to mix, and they don't want like sixth forms. They don't want integrated sixth forms. Our situation is different because our schooling system has been the same throughout, but that's because our schooling system was always segregated to begin with. Like because like most of the schools where I'm from, like my school, the girls' school is over 100 years old and the boys' school is 400 years old. So it's just they've never integrated ever. So that's like one of the biggest problems for younger people. It's because like we don't have conflict anymore, but the legacy is still so strong. Like all the institutions are separated, so there's no chance. Like that's why recovery is going to take so long. Like we have integrated schools, but where I come from, integrated schools tend to be more geared towards Protestantism. Like Protestant kids tend to go to integrated schools more than Catholic kids. Like they tend to go to the state, like the church funded schools, which a lot of it is because the church puts money into the schools. So a lot of Catholic schools have really good facilities and they have really good like A-level choices and GCSE choices. So they're better schools. Whereas all the Protestant schools are state schools, so they're state funded. So obviously their facilities aren't as good. So there's no real reason to integrate because every part of our lives is separate. And it has been since I was primary, like even primary schools. You have Catholic primary schools and you have Protestant primary schools. They're not called that, but everybody knows what the Catholic ones are and what the Protestant ones are. And you send your kids to the ones that correlate with you. It's very silly, but that's why like integration, I think, is probably the hardest part about Northern Ireland because our institutions are built to separate. They're not built to force our generation to integrate at all. So we just don't.
Because what you are saying, these are kind of, you know, these are serious political commitments need to be there to actually move things together. But it looks like, you know, those are kind of taboo area, and everyone is like trying to bypass them, and it shows why the politics is still failing. I mean, even today, I think they still fail to form the government.
Yeah, we still don't have a government. I mean, that's nothing new because I mean, during my A levels, we didn't have a government for I think it was over a year. I think Northern Ireland holds the world record, like for the longest time without a functioning government. I actually think we hold the record because it was like over 2 years, I think, where all of our politicians just refused to even get into a room, and or they were talking. There was talks, but nothing happened and nothing changes.
Mm. I mean, especially the current situation is quite fascinating because the people who won the election, I mean, they're not allowed to form the government because the people who lost the election, they have a big say there as well.
Well, see,
So,
like the problem with it is that Northern Ireland has mandatory coalition, so you cannot form a government without without the biggest nationalist party and the biggest unionist party agreeing to form a government together. So that basically means that everybody holds a trigger over all political institutions. So it basically like our politics from a politics student standpoint makes absolutely no sense. Like it is genuinely built to be the most frustrating form of government you could possibly find because all our political parties, all like we've got 5 main political parties. We have 2 unionist ones, 2 nationalist ones, and we have an alliance one. So they're very much in the middle of the road. All 5 of them are in government together all the time. So we had one year where we had one party try to create they tried to create an opposition together, but that completely failed because unionism and nationalism was so angry that these 2 political parties, like the opposing viewpoints, were trying to form a coalition together to create an opposition. That like nobody voted for them. So in the next election, they got destroyed. Like our politics is not built to function. It is predicated on the idea that we have like it's like forcing kids who hate each other to work together, even though you know they're not. Like you physically know that these 2 groups of people will not work together at all because it's not just about unionism and nationalism. It's because the DUP, which is our biggest unionist party, they're a conservative party. So like they're the Unionist and Conservative Party. They're actually affiliated with the Conservatives on mainland. But then we also have Sinn Féin, who are a left-wing party, and you're trying to make them make policies together, and it just doesn't work. It's so frustrating. But both together doesn't work because it means you have an incohesive policy that just one wants really liberal, really progressive, like basically Labour politics, and then the other one wants conservative politics, and they just it literally is like trying to get Labour and the Conservatives to form a coalition. That just would not function in terms of education or like infrastructure or policing. It just doesn't work. They're fundamentally opposite.
Do you know, like the way the modern democracy works, like most of the countries in the world, it's like winners take all.
Yeah.
But in Northern Ireland, winners take nothing.
Everybody loses. It's like
everybody loses.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who the largest party is because they're not going to get through their mandate. And I think this is like one of the biggest issues. People in Northern Ireland don't vote for their parties; they vote against the other parties. So even a lot of people, like I'm a unionist and I'm a Protestant, but most people I know, particularly my age, hate the DUP. They cannot stand them. Like how Scotland feels about the Conservatives is how Northern Ireland feels about the DUP. We do not like them. Like, and I'm fine with saying that. I would say that to anybody. I do not like the DUP, and most people I know don't like them either. But most people, whenever they get into that voting booth, will not vote. They will vote for the DUP because they know that the other unionist party won't win, and they don't actually aim to win. So they'll just vote for this party that they don't particularly like because they're so terrified of the other side, like the other side getting more political power. And so we're just stuck on a merry-go-round of just everybody being really annoyed at the results, being really angry at the government, and then whenever it comes to voting, they vote for the same thing because they're so scared of what the other side will do. And that's the same for like nationalism as well. They will always vote for Sinn Féin, even if they don't particularly agree with Sinn Féin's policies, because they know that it's like Sinn Féin is going to win over like Alliance or like Labour or SDLP. Sinn Féin will win seats. So they're a safe bet. You vote for Sinn Féin, a nationalist voice will be heard to oppose the Unionist voice. Even though the Unionist voice and the nationalist voice in power aren't your voice in your constituency. It's very frustrating.
I mean, I'll make a kind of flippant comment now. I mean, do you like Game of Thrones? I mean,
yeah,
I think most of their shooting locations were in Northern Ireland. I mean, it kind of makes sense because, you know, this society is actually fit for Game of Thrones, like, you know, it's kind of medieval setting.
It is. It's just the biggest problems with Northern Ireland is that like our politics, like a lot of times, like culture informs politics. Like I know that in Scotland, like Scottish culture and like irredentist nationalism, that informs the politics. Like the culture of like it is a cultural hatred of England. Like it's not like even people who don't really care will say, "Oh, I hate the English." Like it's just part of your culture, and there's a very separate culture in Scotland to the culture there is in England. So that separate cultural values and the way that they approach history has created politics, like has created nationalist politics where they want to separate. Whereas Northern Ireland, our politics informs our culture. It's the other way around. It's like the way you vote informs the school you send your kids to, the friends that you have, like the way that you view one issue, which is the border, informs your life almost entirely in Northern Ireland. Because whenever I try to explain it to people who aren't from Northern Ireland, saying you're Protestant or saying you're Catholic isn't a religious thing here. It's more like categorizing yourself into an ethnic group than it is a religious one. And that kind of like, and that's informed by politics. So if you're a nationalist, you're a Catholic, and if you're a Unionist, you're a Protestant, even if you've never been to church.
Yeah.
That's how we categorize points. But because like politics created Northern Ireland. So like 100 years ago, politics created us. Whenever James I settled Ulster, that was political. And that started, I mean, we were fighting before that, but that really started. That there was such a high concentration of Protestantism in that area that it just started, a never-ending ethnic conflict that has just continued on, and it makes no sense. But because we have that political split, it informs every other part of how you experience culture in Northern Ireland, and that's why it's so hard to get rid of, because politics is ingrained in every aspect of culture here. It's like the Irish language. That should not be political, because it's like, but it's been made political. It's been made a political viewpoint because it was adopted by nationalism as this is something we want. And because nationalism adopted it, unionism didn't like it. Unionism decided it was bad. And that snowballed from there. Whereas it's just culture, like it's not political at all. Saying people should be able to learn the Irish language, because irregardless of whether or not you think the UK government, whether like we should be part of the United Kingdom or the Republic, we're still on the island. Like it's still the language of the island. It shouldn't be a big deal, but it is, because politics has invaded every aspect of culture. It's not like that in Scotland or England or anywhere else I have been. It's just a Northern Ireland issue, and it's so frustrating.
It kind of makes sense, because when you talk about this like 400, 500 years history, it's like so, you know, entrenched, and I think, you know, the society never actually reconciled. So the existing society never accepted these people, and then, you know, and then over the years, and we saw like, you know, things happen in the like early 20th century, when, you know, Ireland got their own thing. The things continue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think like people always say like the conflict is over here and the violence is over. Like there's no more violence. But like the root causes of conflict were never addressed. because it's not just like, it's like they thought that ending the violence would end the conflict and we would all just be fine. But it didn't start in 1916, like with the Rising. It didn't start with the creation of Northern Ireland in the 1920s. It started long before that. And it would take a significant amount of effort that no government is willing to put in, because the governments don't care about, because it doesn't benefit our current largest political parties to actually end the conflict and like end this perpetuating like split between the two communities, because they rely on that split to garner votes. So it does not benefit them at all to end this conflict completely and fully integrate the communities, because if they did, they'd have no mandate. They would have no political mandate whatsoever, so there would be no point, at least from that point of view. And maybe that's cynical of me, but that's what I see, and that's what I've experienced.
Because the whole idea about this, like, Good Friday Agreement is just, trust building in the two communities. I mean, what you are saying, I mean, it's totally segregated. How the hell, did they make that trust building? Because they don't see each other.
I think like they built trust in political institutions, but political institutions don't affect the everyday person. Like even our sports are separated. If there are Irish sports and there are British sports, you don't like, it's like we have Gaelic football, and we have like camogie, which is kind of like shinty, and like Catholics play that, and Unionists play rugby, and they row.
I still remember, like, I think you in my class, you recommended this TV show, Dairy Girls. Yeah. I kind of, it's like mix and match. So I did not go through like chronological order. I just like random episode. I think one of the episodes were talking about, what's the difference between Catholic and Protestant.
Yeah, see, it's so funny.
Really funny.
True.
It's true. Like, I mean, the Protestants don't like ABBA.
Yeah, that was a weird one. I like ABBA, but it's like Protestants.
Who doesn't like ABBA?
I know, but like it's like, oh, like Catholics are fond of statues and Protestants like marching. Like, thing is that that's just actually true. Doesn't make any sense, but it is.
Some of the things are political as well. Like one of the things they're saying that, yeah, I mean, Catholics are poor alcoholics.
No? That's probably not as true now. It's kind of a running joke in Northern Ireland that Protestants got the good land, so they have nicer houses. Like they got all the good land, so they have nicer houses, and they tend to be richer because like obviously a lot of places wouldn't let. It is quite serious. It's a funny joke that a lot of people make now, but it was because like a lot of Catholics were discriminated against in terms of like government jobs or policing jobs or like white collar jobs. So a lot of the time, or like a lot of higher education places, they didn't really get into it because they favored Protestant applicants. So it kind of became a thing where like Catholics were considered like the blue collar, they got more of the blue collar jobs, and Protestants got the white collar jobs. And that's like, this is like, that's a systemic thing that kind of, it's not as prevalent now. Like with my generation, that's not as big a thing because obviously like most people I know went to education, like regardless of each side. But that is still a thing. Like it has become a joke, but that was a genuine occurrence that did happen in Northern Ireland.
So that's like kind of, we're talking about post-conflict reconciliation. I mean, so if I compare this with South Africa, the post-apartheid South Africa, if you look at some of the statistics are, I mean, just horrendous. Like I think 10% white population own 73% of the most valuable lands in that country. So I mean, what we are talking about here?
Yeah, it is quite similar to that, where it's just there's a lot more generational wealth within Protestantism, I think, than there is in Catholicism. Well, like I'm talking about like the ethnic groups rather than the religious. No, but that's just it's a legacy of the Troubles that is slowly changing as more and more people go to university and it's becoming more accessible. And I know that like on all job applications here, you have to designate as Protestant or Catholic. So you can say prefer not to say, but they do ask you what you are. And it's because in the equality, like I'm pretty sure there's something in the Equalities Act that says like you have to have a certain amount of both in your company. Like you can't have a company and it's just Protestants. So like I know that the police have a quota that they try to fill. So they're trying to get half of the police service is Catholic and the half is Protestant, because for a really long time, Catholics weren't really favoured in the police, and then it was really dangerous for them to be in the police. So it was really hard to recruit them. So now they're like, a lot of places do ask whether you're Protestant or Catholic, just because they want to have an even split across the workplace. So that I think it's more to protect themselves than it is to actually help people now. Like it started off as a way to make sure that everybody was getting fair treatment, but now it's just so that you can't be sued and said, oh, you didn't hire me because I'm a Catholic. And
so the problem is, I mean, if you're a Bangladeshi living in Northern Ireland and if you apply for a job.
Yes, that is a problem. You designate as other, or prefer not to say.
I think there is a like comedian, he was telling this joke that, you know, if you're Pakistani living in like Northern Ireland, normally, you know, Catholics bomb the Protestant bomb. No? So if you're Pakistani living in Northern Ireland, you'll be bombed by both.
Yeah.
But again, like I think these are like the side effect of the actual problem, you know, has been there.
Yeah.
Of years. So these are just, you know, it's just part of the game, part of the big game.
Yeah. And I think it is, I would say that it probably is getting better, because I mean, I can only speak from personal experience, but I know that I wasn't really raised in a way that, like, I didn't really know about the troubles until I was much older. Like, I'm not sure if my parents did it on purpose, but like my parents didn't go to church. So that was never a big thing. To my granny's unending tragedy, my parents never went to church, and Sam and I, my brother, we weren't baptized or anything, so we didn't go to church. And like it wasn't really in my realm of understanding that the troubles was something that occurred, or like Protestants and Catholics was an issue, until I probably went to secondary school and started learning about it, or like until I was probably about 12 or 13, whenever the flag protests happened, which was something really silly. Basically, the town hall in Belfast said, we're not going to fly the Union flag every day. We're going to fly it on the holidays like everywhere else in the UK does. And then there were protests because people were angry that they weren't going to fly the Union flag every day. And I think that was the first time that, like, that it is really silly, but I think that was the first time that I like understood that there was actually a divide in my country, and there was like issues. Like I grew up, like the thing is though, I grew up and it was in the background, but I just never paid attention to it whatsoever. Because obviously, I think I told you before, there was a police man who, there was a bomb under his car, and whenever he got into it and started the engine, it exploded and he died. So because my dad was in the police, we had to check under the car every morning before I went to school. I think I was in primary school whenever it started. So he would get down on his hands and knees and look under the car before he went off to work. And like Sam and I, we would just be in the, like we would have to wait and couldn't get in the car. So there was stuff like that going on, but I don't know where my brain was, but I just did not recognize that as being anything out of the ordinary. To me, it was just, I think it's because Dad specifically played it down and like never made mention of it. He just said, give me a minute before you get into the car, and that was it. He didn't really speak about it.
But at the same time, you born after 1998.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm born in 99. So like I grew up in a time period where the Troubles was not even mentioned. And a lot of schools don't teach the Troubles. Like most people my age don't really know, you don't know about the Troubles. Because the thing is though, it was essentially a civil war in my country going on for decades. And we call it the Troubles. So whenever you're younger or you hear the word the Troubles, you don't associate with this was a war that was going on in your country and people were dying. And schools don't teach you about it. So it's not actually on the curriculum of schools until you go to GCSEs. And even then, so the way GCSE history works, you have to pick GCSE history first of all. So if you don't pick it, you're never going to learn it. But there are 4 or 5 different like subjects that your school can pick within history. My school picked World War II. So I didn't do the Troubles at all. So it was like different periods of it was 20th century history, and you could pick different periods. One of the periods was the history of the Troubles. My school did not pick that. So I didn't learn about the Troubles at all. Like throughout school, I actually didn't learn about it at all. Now I'm thinking about it. The only reason I did it was because I did A-level politics. So I needed to know about the Troubles to be able to understand how the political parties were created. But that was the only reason that I learned about the Troubles at all. So for most people my age, it's not spoken about. Nobody talks about it. It's not in school curriculums. We don't learn about it. I think they just are hoping that if we don't know about it, it'll just disappear. But obviously that's not true because your parents will talk about it. And I think that's worse. Like, I think it would be significantly better if schools from like your first year of education were teaching you about it in history and like saying this is what happened with an unbiased viewpoint. But there really couldn't be an unbiased viewpoint because we don't have integrated schools, but that's a different issue. Rather than learning about what is essentially a very biased viewpoint from your parents because they lived it, they experienced it, so they can't have, they will have a bias because they lived through it. We don't learn about it at all. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. My school never mentioned the Troubles. It was never brought up in education. And I did A-level history. I did GCSE history. We never spoke about it once, never mentioned. It was not even a part of our education, which I think is wrong. Because you can't reconcile a history that you don't know.
I mean, it's just quite like, I mean, so what you are trying to do is like, you create this very dystopian society where things are there, but you just deny it. So
nobody talks about it.
But you see the things everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere, in your school, in your day-to-day life, in your, in your like neighborhood, everything. Everything.
And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a generation of people who have all of these biases and a lot of this anger without understanding where this anger is coming from. Because I understand why my grandparents feel the way they feel. I like, my grandparents they're a lot better now that I'm older and I argue, because I argue with everybody in my household. But like, I argue with them about it, but they still have some biases because obviously my grandparents were born in the 30s. So they grew up the whole way throughout the Troubles. And like their parents were young whenever their parents were born before Northern Ireland was created. So like they have a very different viewpoint, and I understand their viewpoint because they lived through it. You're going to have a generation of people who have this generational trauma, but not understanding the nuances at all, or being able to actually understand or articulate why they feel the way they feel. They just feel that way because their parents feel that way. And there's no reason for anyone in my generation at all to care about the Troubles. There isn't. Because it hasn't affected us at all. Particularly my age and younger. There is no reason for us to have biases at all. It doesn't make any sense. But everybody does. Because nobody learns about it, and it's like you're born with a viewpoint and you will be given that viewpoint whether or not you want it. And because we don't learn about it in school, and because we don't mix really, and even if you do mix, the most mixing that happens between Protestants and Catholics is usually in sixth form. So by that point, you're 17 years old. So by that point, your viewpoint's probably pretty well held at that point. So that's because at sixth form, you can move different schools depending on what A-level subjects you want to do. So I know that my school, by sixth form, it did get a lot more like Catholic students because my school amalgamated in sixth form. So the Protestant grammar school, the Protestant boys grammar school, and the Protestant girls grammar school amalgamated, but they were always the two best schools in Fermanagh, where my county where I live. So whenever they amalgamated, it became the best school in Fermanagh. It had the most resources, it had the most teachers. It was just, if you wanted your kids to go to a really good university, you sent them there for sixth form because we had the most subject choices anyway. But by the time you're 16, 17 years old, you're past your formative years, especially in Northern Ireland. It is hard to change someone's viewpoint if you've grown up that way. So by that point, your viewpoint is pretty well cemented and can't really change it very much.
Just like trying to like explore more about this, this like, what does it mean, like in this, like being a Protestant, and what does it mean to you? What kind of things do you guys do? I mean, are you excited about something, like, I mean, I don't know, like St. Patrick's Day, Catholic.
That's the thing. Protestants don't like St. Patrick's Day at all. It's not something.
So like, I mean, which things excite you guys, you know?
Oh, probably the 12th of July. Like, obviously, I feel my family's probably, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about that because my parents did not like the 12th of July or anything very
Mm,
Protestant at all, because obviously my dad was in the police.
mm,
So he did his very best to not be in the country when the 12th of July was occurring, because if it did, he would have to go into the riots and he'd be in riot gear in the middle of people like throwing glass and stuff at him, and he just would rather not. So we were always away. But the 12th of July, do you know what the 12th of July is?
yeah, yeah.
Well,
That's like bonfire, isn't it?
yeah. And they
Mm.
like burn effigy.
Okay,
Like,
so sorry, Jane. I mean, so this is the month of July. Okay, so what's what happened this 12th of July for you?
I didn't do anything. For me, I feel like a lot of people on the 12th of July, it's a really big day out for all Protestant families.
Mm,
And I think I probably, again, have a different perspective because I don't live in the big city. So I don't live
mm,
in Belfast or Derry,
mm,
where, like, so usually what happens on the 12th is we have something called a parades commission,
mm,
unknown to me. And they decide the route that the 12th parades take. And a lot of the Orange Order are very unhappy that they can't take their original parade routes and that it's been changed. So there's always riots about that. They're like the 12th of July is a time where like fighting between Protestants and Catholics happens a lot, because what happens is they come out in big groups and then they riot and they set things on fire. And this year in particular is quite rowdy because of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the sea
mm,
border. A
mm.
lot of Protestants are very angry about that. Like someone set a bus on fire with the bus driver still in it. It was a very big issue.
Oh my God.
And so the 12th is normally a time of really high tension between like the two communities, especially in the cities. Not so much where I'm from, because I live in a place where it's majority Catholic. So it's majority Catholics in Fermanagh where I live.
Mm,
And the 12th is usually quite a chill day out. I don't like going because I don't really like the bands. I think it's silly and I don't agree with the 12th anyway.
mm, mm,
So, so I didn't go. But most families, it's like a family day out. That's the
mm,
nice way of putting it. But a lot of times people go out, they light the bonfires. There were lots of pictures of Michelle O'Neill, who's like the first minister, or she should be first minister,
mm,
on the bonfires, and they burned her picture and they burn tricolour flags and set stuff on fire, and then they fight, and then they fight with the police. Like
mm,
it's supposed to be a cultural day, but nobody actually knows what the day
mm.
is. It's literally just a day where you set things on fire and fight with the police. Or if you're from a rural area, you just listen to the bands marching up and down the street.
Mm. I mean, I was like, because normally, I tend to do a bit of research when I do podcasts. And one of the things I was listening to, this like Channel 4 doing this like documentary, and this journalist was asking questions to
Yeah.
youngsters. And says like, I mean, why do you guys, love this kind of stuff, like fight, And says, and he was saying that people are just bored here, just nothing to do.
I think it's just you do it because it's always been done. Like people don't really think about it as a big deal. It's just something that happens. It's the 12th of July. You go out, you get really drunk, you fight with the police, you set things on fire. It's just a cultural thing that you just do
Mm,
every year. Like I am painting quite a bad picture of it, but in some places like where I live, it's all right because it's like a family day out. People wear union flags and they listen to the bands, march up and down the street, and like you bring your kids and stuff.
mm,
But
mm,
in the cities, it is a problem. It's just people fight.
mm,
I think the reason it's so rowdy is because Protestantism, and by Protestantism I mean unionism too.
mm, mm,
Unionism tends to be very angry where I live because there's a viewpoint, right or wrong, that from the Good Friday Agreement, unionism is the one that compromises
mm,
consistently.
mm,
Every single like the St Andrews Agreement and everything that came after it seems to be from their viewpoint, a compromise on unionism, they're giving another inch and another inch and another inch. And they're just angry. Like they're just angry and they're bitter because they're so afraid of nationalism that the 12th of July kind of seems like a way to like push back. We're still here. This is still our country. And to me, that's why it's so viscerally angry, and that's why so many people light the bonfires and they fight and they get really rowdy. It's because people are so frustrated with politics. Politicians keep feeding this idea of fear that the other side is taking away from Protestantism, because like Protestantism, unionism, because like this in 1921 the country completely belonged to unionism, but from 1998 a lot of unionism takes the viewpoint that nationalism is this like slow encroaching, it's like an invasive species that continues to take over more and more areas of life, and you're just going to keep compromising until we're United Ireland. And people are so scared of that it comes out in like these big shows of anger and these bonfires and these riots. Brexit and the Irish Protocol, that really lit a fire under certain aspects of unionism. They're just so angry that there's now a border between Ireland and the rest of the UK. It's just added another thing. It was like, this is another thing we've lost.
I mean, I'm just like trying to see, like, I mean, what's your generation think about, this like existential crisis about, like if the whole island becomes Ireland, what will happen to you?
I don't know. Because the thing is, though,
are you afraid of that, or you don't care?
I mean, I have opinions, but my opinion isn't. I think the problem is I don't really have a romantic attachment to the idea of Northern Ireland staying in the UK or Northern Ireland being part of Ireland. I just look at it from a very pragmatic point of view. So, like over 30% of Northern Ireland works in public sector. If we go down south, I think the biggest problem with it is nobody ever talks about the realities of what would occur if we were to become part of Ireland. And I think it would make people a lot less afraid. If, like, political parties made a contingency and said, this is what we promise will happen. Nothing catastrophic is going to happen. But nobody ever talks about what will happen after. It's just this very like spooky idea of, oh, we're going to become a United Ireland, but nobody knows what that means. Realistically, what I think would happen is we would still have Stormont. Like Northern Ireland would still be a devolved institution. And instead of London, we would just have Dublin. And I fully think very little would change. In my opinion, we wouldn't have as much money because Northern Ireland is a black hole for money for the UK, never mind Ireland. So like, I don't think anyone can afford us. We would be better, slightly worse off in terms of economics. But apart from like, we wouldn't explode. Very little would probably change in terms of our political landscape. I just don't think much would change.
My problem is like when I, teach like Palestine-Israel thing, I mean, so, I mean, there is no going home for anyone because you just cannot go home. There is no, I mean, which home you are talking about? The people who left like Russia or Ukraine, and all those like Holocaust survivors. I mean, where do they come back? I mean, so you have to live with that. And then, and then from there, how to reconcile and how to make a new story for that. And no one is willing to do that.
I think like the problem is both sides use this idea of like a United Ireland as a very abstract concept, but nobody really tells us what that would mean or what that would look like. And it's fear mongering. It's 100% fear mongering from particularly unionism. It's fear mongering from unionist politicians whenever they talk about United Ireland, because they tell us that it would be the worst thing that's ever happened. And like going back to what I said earlier, because we don't learn about the Troubles in school, because we don't really learn about the South at all. Like we do not learn about the Republic ever. A lot of people I know, I remember this specifically. There was a girl in my year, and I don't want to say her name, but her mum was a politician, and she had never been down south. I thought that was wild, because I live on the border. So I live as far west and as far south as you can get. Like in Fermanagh, you can pay for everything in euros. Like you can anywhere you go, you can pay in euro. You'll get your change in sterling, but you can pay in euro. So, and we get lots of people from the south coming up and shopping here and going back home. We have lots of southerners in Fermanagh all the time, and I just thought it was so weird that she'd never been down south. But it's fear. It's because we don't learn anything about it. People see down south as this really scary foreign land. It is literally 20 minutes away. Like from my was 20 minutes.
I mean, this is just a tiny island.
Yeah, it's so, like you can get to it is I can get to Dublin in 2 hours and it will take me about an hour 40 minutes to get to Belfast. So I am like at a direct point where it is almost as fast for me to go to Galway or Dublin as it is for me to go to Belfast or Londonderry. Like it doesn't equate. And it's just because we don't learn about the South at all. We don't learn about the Troubles. We're not integrated. So everything we know, my generation knows, is based on what our parents tell us or what we learn about, like in church or from other people in school. So you're in a bubble and you're not really learning. Because I believe that the more you learn, the more tolerant you become. Like that's been my experience of everyone I have known. The farther along you get in education, the more you learn and the farther along you get, the more tolerant a person you become. And the more people you meet, the more tolerant a person you become. But because we're not learning and because we're not mixing, you're not building tolerance. And in fairness, in my generation, there's no real hatred between the two sides from my age. Well, certainly where I live, there isn't really a big hatred. It's kind of more of a joke. Oh, like you're a Catholic, I'm a Protestant. Like it's not really a serious thing, but it's still people my age, regardless of whether or not they feel about like Catholicism, like Catholics as people or like nationalists as people. The ideas are scarier than the actual reality of the people that we know. So even if like even if you know loads of Catholic people and you even talk to them at my age, you'll still vote the way your parents vote. And you'll still think the way your parents think. You'll be more tolerant in general, but whenever it comes to big ideas of unionism and nationalism, you're not really gonna change your viewpoint. Like I could even say the same of myself. I don't really care either way, but I am a unionist, and I think most of the reason I'm a unionist is because my parents are unionists. Like if Ireland, if we got United Ireland, I'd be like, well, oh well. Like I'd be concerned about the logistics, but if someone was to explain then and say, this is what we're going to do to make sure that like hospital bills don't go up too much, or like the cost of living is not going to rise too much, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. But I'm still a unionist, and I think I'm a unionist because my parents are, because we don't learn about the other side whatsoever, and they don't learn about us.
But also, it sounds to me it's a kind of two stories. There are two stories there, and two stories don't mix with each other. Because the other side of the story is the Catholic stories. They feel bad, be part of, the United Kingdom, because they think that, oh, they're losing something.
Yeah, well, that's it as well. And because we don't ever talk about it or we don't ever mix, these two conflicting viewpoints and these two conflicting stories run parallel to each other, but they never really cross over because we don't have any way to compare what we think outside of politics, because every other aspect of society and culture tends to be split. Even if it's not a conscious split, like say you're not consciously being like, I don't like Catholics, so I'm going to stick with my Protestant friend. It just tends to be your circle, or like I even know a lot of my parents' family friends. So a lot of the people that I see on the day to day, they're all Protestants as well. So that would tend to be my circle as well. So it's not even a conscious thing that people do at my age, because most people my age, unless you live in the really big cities and you grew up embroiled in that physical conflict where like the two sides are still angry and bitter and they're fighting, they're not doing that where I live. We're just kind of neighbors, like just kind of living with like in and around each other. You don't consciously split up, but that's just what happens.
I mean, like why the bigger cities have got this problem is more stark.
I think it's just because there's a bigger population, there's a bigger concentration. So I'm like in Belfast, there's a really big population of Protestants who all live together. And there's a really big population of Catholics who all live together. Because obviously, like in and around the time of like the Troubles, obviously when infrastructure was being built, there isn't really any infrastructure here. We don't have trains, we barely have buses. Like we don't really have anything. All of it was being built to the cities, so everybody moved to the cities. And most of the conflict as a result happened in the cities because you had two really big groups living side by side in close quarters, where here we're all kind of spread out about this. And because that idea of you believe what your parents believe, it's just that generational trauma is a lot, like there's a lot more trauma for people who live in the cities. And because of that, the generational trauma just keeps perpetuating itself into a cycle of violence. Your parents were treated terribly, like say, most of the killing and violence happened in the cities anyway. So they were a lot closer to it than we were. So like say things like you knew someone or your parents knew someone who was shot in the Troubles, you still feel that in a way that I might not, because there wasn't as much violence here. Even though like things like the Enniskillen bomb happened where I live, because I live in Enniskillen, but it's not as when there was a house of Catholics shot up by like the UDA, and then there was a retaliation of that because they existed in the big cities. It's like violence happens in cities because there's more people and there's more groups of people living in close quarters. I think it's just that. And because they're still living in those same areas, the same stories are cycling over time. So more happens, so more people know about it. So you just have a continuation of that cycle of violence in the cities more so than anywhere else.
And especially when places like Belfast, if it is segregated.
The peace walls are still up. There's still big concrete walls separating streets because of violence.
So the pubs are also more or less designated that this is Catholic pub, this is like...
Yes. The thing is though, there's still that here, but it's more of a tongue-in-cheek joke. Like everybody, it's like, oh, like that's like, I know, I live in a village and there is a Catholic pub and a Protestant pub, but everybody jokes about it. Like it's kind of more of a tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, that's the Catholic pub, that's the Protestant pub, and it is. Not as serious an issue as it would be. Like we make fun of it in a way that people from the cities probably don't. But I think that's also because Fermanagh is probably one of the few places in Northern Ireland where there is a Protestant minority. So Protestantism is in the minority in Fermanagh. So there's not that big of a clash between the two because there is a Catholic majority. I think that makes it a lot more mellow here because Protestants are in the minority. So there's not that big clash between two peoples here as there is in cities where there's a much bigger population. And obviously I live like Fermanagh is the most sparsely populated county in Northern Ireland. So we're all spread out more. So we're not living in close quarters. Like we're all living kind of farther away from each other. So if you feel the way that you feel, like say you're a Catholic who really doesn't like Protestants, you can't avoid them. You're not going to come into contact with them every day, especially because our schools are segregated and stuff like that. You can avoid that in a way that it's kind of unavoidable in cities because you're living in close quarters.
I'm just thinking of, like if a Bangladeshi, Scottish, British man in a bar in Belfast, what will happen to me?
I would say racism is probably still a big issue here, regardless. So I feel like it wouldn't be great.
Do you think I'll be safe? I'll be safe there?
Probably, but also no. In the news, we've seen a lot. I mean, in the news, I feel like you would probably not have a great time in cities. I feel like that might be because Northern Ireland is quite a conservative place. I feel like it's not as much in the countryside. Well, it probably is. It's just they're not as aggressive in the countryside as they are in the cities. Like I know there was a refugee family. The thing is that this is just xenophobia. It's not racism. It's just xenophobia because their family was Polish. But someone like broke the glass in their windows and like kept coming back and like breaking all the glass because they were immigrants. So I feel like it wouldn't be great. It would just be a different form of discrimination. It wouldn't be sectarianism. It would probably just be racism. It's just
Quite
very
frustrating, isn't it? The whole
yes.
thing just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
No, I've painted quite a bleak picture, but I would
Mm,
say that it is getting better because, like
mm,
my generation, there is more integration in my generation than there ever has been
mm,
before. And I just think that it's just time. It's just going to take
mm,
time and like integration of schools. That's probably the biggest thing that
mm,
needs to happen. The schools need to be integrated and they need to teach the troubles. Because if they taught the troubles, if they taught an unbiased version of the troubles that showed both viewpoints, that showed the stories from both sides, that didn't try to like paint a picture and say, like, this side was wrong or
mm,
this side was wrong, which is very hard because if you do that, both sides will be upset.
mm,
So if you do that and you give it enough time, things will get better. But it's just we are because the thing is that we are 20 years out, but we're only one generation out. So like my generation is the first one to grow up in peace. But
mm,
like that is a bit mental if you think about it, because my generation of people of like people born in this part of the island is the first generation in hundreds of years
mm,
to not see
mm,
strong conflict
mm,
between the two sides. It's the only one. So like of course the picture at the moment is like it's better than it has ever been,
mm, mm. I'm
but it
just,
will take time.
I mean, I'll ask you some personal question. I mean, so it's up to you. I mean, if you want to answer. Do you have any Catholic friends from?
Most of my friends are.
Okay. Did your parents have any Catholic friends from Ireland?
Not really, not very many at all. But I think the reason for that is that, I mean, my mum does. I think my dad has less because of his profession. Obviously, he was in the police, and most of his
Mm,
friends are work friends. That like
mm,
he, because that's where you make most of your friends. So my
mm,
mom's a nurse.
mm,
So she, I mean, her closest friend is a Catholic, like her lifelong friend is. And it's never really been an issue. It was for my granny. She was didn't really like my mum's mother,
mm,
didn't particularly like um, nationalism, but that's again, that's because her mother wasn't from, she was from Ulster, but she wasn't from the six counties. So
mm,
whenever she was young, or like whenever she was born, um, and like the era, she was the era of De Valera and like the partition and stuff like that. So she was really bitter and angry because she lived in a county that wasn't, that was, she lived in Ulster. So initially it was supposed to be all eight counties.
mm,
She lived in a county that got left behind. And so she was very bitter. And as a result, my grandmother was very bitter. My mum, not so much, because my mum moved. She moved out of the countryside and she went to university. She did nursing. And
mm,
so mum had a very different viewpoint of the Troubles, I think, from her mum, because she worked with people who were shot, because she worked in the Royal in Belfast as
mm,
a, but no, she does. Her closest friend is a Catholic. My dad, not as much. He does have some, but because of his profession, most of his friends are police. And
mm,
obviously, my dad joined the police during the Troubles. So, by virtue of that, there weren't very many Catholics in the police because it wasn't safe.
mm,
So, I do have quite a few, but that's because my sixth form, by like as I was saying before, my sixth form got a lot of like people who went to Catholic grammar schools came to my school in sixth form, and I just became friends with them.
mm. Give me some idea about, in terms of demography, like population, the numbers, in terms of like Northern Ireland, what's the demography? Like Catholic, what percentage?
It's probably it's getting quite close. I think it's about 45%, 55%. So
Okay.
45% Catholic, 55% Protestant. I know I'm not sure what it exactly is, but it's a very even, it's closer than it ever has been.
Mm,
So like we're almost at 50-50 now.
mm,
We've always had a majority of Protestants, but less so now.
mm. Is that creating any kind of anxiety? I mean,
Yes, it is.
um,
Well, like
mm,
you can see it. Like obviously Sinn Féin are creating a creeping majority. This is the first time ever that they've had a majority, that they're the large. This is the first time ever that we've had a nationalist party as a majority. And like a lot of people, like the running joke is that like Catholic families have their larger families. Like that's a running joke. They have more kids, whereas Protestants don't have kids. And that's also feeds into why Protestants are richer and Catholics are poor. Like that's like a big joke.
it's
And
not a joke. It's a stereotype.
but it is, yeah, it's a stereotype, but it is. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's just a lot of people are leaving. Like a lot of younger people are just leaving Northern Ireland.
Mm,
Like so where you're just it's becoming more even because we have such an exportation of young people here.
mm, mm,
Because obviously living here is hard. If
mm.
you're young and liberally minded, living in Northern Ireland is incredibly difficult.
Oh,
It's like disheartening to live here. If you have a moderate viewpoint, it's difficult to live here, especially if you're like me and you really enjoy politics.
mm,
It's disheartening and it's hard to live here. Like I'm gonna leave and I'm not gonna come back. I know that, but that's also because there's no jobs here for me either. So it's
mm,
like it's a problem here where unless you are really staunch and you have a really strong viewpoint, which is usually like usually the stronger your viewpoint, usually the more sectarian you will be. Not all, but that's generally the stronger viewpoint, the more of a staunch nationalist or unionist you'll be. You'll stay. But most people who don't carry their way go, they leave.
mm,
They go down south or they go to England or Scotland.
mm. So it's a kind of ongoing trend, the brain
Yeah.
drain.
We are hemorrhaging young people here.
Uh,
People don't come home, they don't stay, they leave.
mm,
It's like why there's because I know that recently, even like the South has the same issue as well. Like the Republic has the same issue that we do. Everybody, like loads of Northern Irish people go to America. Like I have loads of friends who we've all just graduated and they've all got a J1 and they've all gone to the US or
mm,
Canada or Australia.
mm. Then there is a problem, isn't it? Because then the old guards will stay here.
Yes, that's the thing. Like there's no different perspective because the only people who are staying are the people who have a strong belief. And
Mm.
they're actually the people that we don't want in power because
Oh,
they will just perpetuate the same idea. It's difficult to see how they're going to solve it because the only way you could solve it would be to get more moderate people in power and create more jobs and get away from this like hardline politics where nothing changes in terms of health or in terms of infrastructure or education because everybody's fighting about policing, which is just the Ministry of Justice is the biggest issue in Northern Irish politics, realistically. Like that's what everybody fights about. They fight about policing, they fight about the Irish language on road signs. They don't actually do anything to make people want to stay or like they don't do anything to bring jobs to Northern Ireland that would actually incentivize young people to stay. And because it's young people that vote for
mm,
Alliance, the Alliance Party or the middle of the road party,
mm,
it's the young people that vote for them. Like in fairness, they have more seats in this parliament than they have ever done in any parliament before. They have 17 seats, which is
mm,
massive. They're the third largest party. That has never happened before.
mm. So like people like you, like who think about politics, who are progressive, liberal,
Yeah.
who are very reconciling, who can, accept things which
Yeah.
are normal in a normal society. I mean, what are the chances like people like you actually come to the mainstream politics in Northern Ireland? Will you be accepted?
No, because I disagree. I don't know what party. I would probably have to, the only party I could ever possibly be a part of would be the Alliance Party because it's the only party that doesn't, like, it's the only party that doesn't fight about it doesn't fight about unionism or nationalism because I personally don't care. I
Mm,
just, I don't think it's as big as issue. It shouldn't even be the biggest issue. It's
mm,
like, do you remember whenever the Brexit campaign was going on? Like there was a housing crisis, there was an education crisis. Nobody cared because everybody was talking about Brexit. Northern Ireland politics is like that, but constantly. Because the only thing everybody ever talks about is unionism or nationalism. Well, that's not even the issue that everyday people care about. People care about like the price of school uniforms going up, like how to like will kids get free school meals during COVID? That's the kind of stuff that people care about. And I feel like I would probably be too critical of, because I probably wouldn't join a nationalist party because I just logistically I just don't really think a united Ireland is a good idea. I mean, I've got asthma, and I just think it's 80 euros
Oh,
every time you have to see a doctor, and I can't. I'd be too poor. I'm too poor for that. I can't afford it. And like
oh,
both my grandparents are very ill, and like
mm,
I'd be worried about stuff like pension schemes and like can they support 35% of our population that are in public sector, and
mm,
like most of Northern Ireland's most of Northern Ireland work in the agricultural sector, which is a black hole for money.
mm.
Could that be supported? I probably couldn't be in a nationalist party because they don't talk about stuff like that, the important stuff that comes with like the logistics of what a united Ireland could be. They just talk about this romantic idea of a united Ireland without ever actually telling us how it would work. And that would really frustrate me. That would just annoy
Mm,
me.
mm,
And the
mm,
same thing about unionism. They just use it as a, well, we'll have a united Ireland. And I think, well, what
mm,
does that mean?
mm, mm,
I don't think that I could survive in Northern Irish politics. I think I would just get angry and frustrated and
mm,
just
mm,
because it's literally the same argument. They have the same argument consistently every
mm,
single time they're in parliament. And I know Labour and the Conservatives do as well, but Labour get in sometimes. You know, like every decade or so, Labour get in and
mm,
change, and there's a cycle. We don't have a cycle. We are static. Nothing
mm.
has changed since 1998.
Because obviously, your education, your knowledge so far kind of gave
Mhm.
you some of the things about more understanding about how society works. So
Yeah,
your views are basically pragmatic, rational, so, and also like selfish. That's the rational choice, isn't it? Because I have to survive. If I
yeah.
don't have the medication, if
Probably why I'm not suited to politics here, because
mm,
politics here is not rational. And
no,
everything about my political education so far has taught me to take the emotions out of politics and
mm,
look at it, like academically, look at it with facts, not
mm, mm,
not passion. Like we're literally taught to take a really analytical view of how the world works.
mm, mm,
I just don't have any romantic attachment to either idea. And I just wouldn't be able to function in a society that values the romanticism over reality.
mm,
I
mm,
just couldn't function in a political arena that doesn't function on fact.
mm,
I just couldn't do it.
Like with me, like I came from like more like far left background. I mean, I don't understand, like you have to fight for your country, you have to
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice those things. I mean, if there is a, war in my country and if I ask to fight, I'll just flee.
Just say no, no, thank you.
I'll go to Spain. I mean, like, you can see like how these things are built up and then no, and suddenly you are told that you have to sacrifice. But the people who will tell you they will not sacrifice, but you have to
No,
sacrifice. No. So and you can see like if you just like do a bit of thought process there, you see like what's happening there, isn't it?
mm-hmm.
And that's our history, human
Yeah.
history.
And I think like that's one of the big problems here is that you cannot use rationality to argue because that's not part of the psyche of the two communities. They don't use rational thought whenever it comes to, well, like what would be the worst thing that could happen if Irish language was introduced in schools? What is the worst thing that could happen? It's just school. Kids hate
Mm,
learning different languages. Nobody like we all in my school we all had to learn French and German. Everybody hated it. Nobody did it. And now nobody can speak any either of those languages. Like, what would happen if Irish was just another one of those choices that you could choose? You know, like every other, like it would be like the kids, but they would suffer through language class. Some kids would really love it and really excel. It would make some people happy, but most people it wouldn't change anything. But it's not seen like that, where it's seen as a romantic idea. It's an attack on unionism. It's a romantic ideal of nationalism that we would be a Gaelic speaking country when that's just just wouldn't happen. It would just, kids would learn it, they would hate it, and then they would drop it like they do all other languages. It's just one of those things that there's no harm in it, but it's not seen with rational thought. It's seen as like a romantic idea of unionism and nationalism, and that lens colors everything. And it makes it really hard to make rational choices whenever our politicians don't use rational arguments.
I mean, these are my views, so you don't have to agree with me. Some of the things I see, like, like the way this society works. So many things are not actually rational. Doesn't make any sense. If you talk about the royal family, House of Lords, so like those are just basic, isn't it? And then, and then if you want to reconcile Northern Ireland, you have to, solve those other things fast, I mean, people say that, oh, royal family has, they're great, they're not costing us any money. They've got wealth, but their wealth is from 13th century. I mean, can you claim something from 13th century?
I think like people sacrifice a lot for the sake of tradition. And that's what Northern Ireland is. It's sacrificing today for the memory of what we had before. Like you sacrifice all progress because you're afraid, because you won't let go of what happened before and you refuse to move on. And like that is the root cause of our conflict. It's clinging on to the idea of a country that doesn't exist. Unionism is clinging on to this idea that Northern Ireland is a Protestant haven and that it belongs to us. And that like the plantation of Ulster and all of that, it was given to us and it's ours. And then Catholicism clings to the idea that, well, no, this country belonged to Irish Catholics first, and we want to go back to United Ireland. When in reality, there's never actually really been a United Ireland. Act of Union in 1801, Britain just colonized all of it. Like we just all belonged to Britain. And then in 1921, Britain was like, you can have some back, but we're going to keep this bit. So both sides are clinging to something that has never existed for the sake of this like romantic utopia where the other side just doesn't exist. I think it's especially like in the 30s, like I know like De Valera had this idea of like the land of comely maidens, where like he wanted to make Ireland this Catholic utopia where everybody went to church and everybody got married. And obviously that didn't end well because, like the church did a lot of terrible things and all that kind of stuff. So even then that was a fake utopia. But there's still this idea that if we had a united Ireland, we would have peace. I am of the opinion that if a united Ireland happened, we would just have like the troubles would start again. I just think it would start again, exactly where it left off 20 years ago.
Can I add something there? I mean, that reminds me Edward Said, what he was saying. So, so your idea about the United Ireland will create problem for you because you have got a different story, but also your understanding about the prospect because you are seeing what's happening on the ground at the moment. But I think, if the understanding is everyone will be okay.
If we all actually learned about Irish history, because we don't learn it. Like Northern Ireland does not teach Irish history. It just doesn't. The same way that schools in the South, like I don't know if you know this, but most Southern schools don't teach anything about World War I or World War II. They don't learn it at all. Because obviously Ireland was neutral and they didn't like anything, they didn't want anything to do with it. So like there was no there are no real like cenotaphs or anything in the South for the Irish men who died. That's not a thing. Like the Taoiseach, he comes to Fermanagh every year to lay a wreath in Fermanagh because there aren't any in the South. So it's the same thing except like with a different viewpoint. So we don't learn about the trouble. Like we don't learn about the South. We don't learn about the troubles. The South does not learn about Britain at all. They just don't. But if we did, it might make people a wee bit less fearful of the other side because most people in Northern Ireland, most Unionists, don't know anything about Southern politics. The reason I know anything about Southern politics is because I did politics at A-level and we did my final year at school was all Southern politics. So that's the only reason that I know anything about it. And it's, in fairness, it's just as useless as Northern Irish politics. So it probably wouldn't change very much because they're all so deeply inefficient. But everybody's so scared that they're going to lose their identity. I think that is a big issue for both sides. Like, who would we be if we became a united Ireland? Like, what would happen to this never-ending fighting and this legacy of conflict? Like, would it go away? I don't think it would. I just think from studying like Irish history, I just feel
Mm,
like
mm,
it would just be another cycle of violence. Because anytime the issue is with Northern Ireland, anytime anything changes,
mm,
breaks out. Literally anytime. Because it's like the belt, like the Irish Protocol went in place, and there were riots all over Belfast. Like there were people setting stuff on fire, and like there were shootings at the dockyards, and like riots in Bel. Like, and like there was the police had to, like the police had to enter like Derry, and they had to like there was a heavy police presence in Derry because there were riots and there was fires and stuff, and like each side was attacking each other, even though it's not like it was anyone in Northern Ireland's fault. Like it was not anyone's fault in Northern Ireland. It wasn't even the politicians in Northern Ireland. Like for once, it actually was not their fault. Like
mm,
the Northern Ireland Protocol, they had nothing to do with it. They didn't get a say at all. So you can't even blame them. But
mm,
it was still taken as this is a big change and it's scary, so we must fight.
mm,
Like as if setting a bus on fire would change anything, but it's just that fear because nobody knows anything other than what we have. So the
mm,
idea that if you were to change the constant, people get really scared and then they just react
mm,
in sense.
mm. If the United Ireland is built on the idea about, they're like two people and it's still not reconciled, but someone has to take care of it. And then the idea is one will have the upper hand, then other one
Yeah.
has to be ruled. So if this kind of ideas are still floating, is there's no concrete idea about.
Like unless you actually change the culture and you educate kids, because
Mm,
my generation upwards, there's nothing you can do. You can't fix us. It's gonna have to be education slowly, because obviously, like the nature of history is that every generation that comes is a bit more tolerant than the one that comes before. That's just
mm,
the nature of human progression.
mm, mm, mm,
So if you implement these ideas of teaching the others, like teaching both sides, and you do like cross community education, or like I know even in school in my sixth form, we had I did politics at the Catholic girls' school because my school didn't host it. Like my school didn't do politics on their own, so we had to go to Mount Lourdes, which was the Catholic girls' school.
mm,
So I did politics there with Catholics in the class, and my teacher was a Catholic.
mm,
And if you do more stuff like that, but younger, like start from way, way
mm,
younger,
mm,
like force that integration with kids who
mm,
like, don't really understand anything about the Troubles yet. That's how it's going to change over
mm,
a really long period of time. But unless you address those issues first, like unless you address the legacy of the Troubles and you actually try to change something before you have a united Ireland, I
mm,
don't see how that would help anything.
mm. The problem is, I mean, if you don't see the future, and if you see the future might be worse off than what you are now,
Yeah,
you never accept that future. So I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't make any sense. Like I mean, any society, I mean, whatever the society is, I don't care as long as they provide those things. The stuff you were thinking of, education, health intervention,
mhm,
job prospect,
yeah,
housing. But if
yeah,
you think that, oh my
exactly.
God, if I go there, if I join with that, then I will be discriminated, or they will have better prospect than me. So like, and the existing societies is still doing the same thing. So it's a
Yeah,
bizarre situation. So the current is not good. The future is not good either. So I mean, things need to be changed. That's for sure, isn't
it need to change soon. And I just think like coming from Northern Ireland and then going to live in Scotland, I just it was so weird because like people would like joke about the Troubles and they'd sing like IRA songs, and I was like, what is going on? Because like I very much thought that Northern Ireland like was completely isolated and nobody really knew anything about it. But I remember this year actually, a boy in Glasgow, I was at a priest and he came up to me, he'd heard my accent obviously, and just meandered over. And he asked me if I was a Protestant or a Catholic, and I was very confused. I was like, "You are not Irish. Why are you asking me that question?"
it?
And then I told him, and then and then he told me I wasn't Irish, and I was like, "Well, I have an Irish passport." Then he started talking about football, and I was like, "I don't care." I don't know anything about football, but I'm pretty sure that's nothing to do with my country,
mm,
my
mm,
violence.
I mean, like, how easy to detect whether you are Catholic or Protestant through your name? Like, I mean, you.
Very easy. Very, very easy. Like
Okay.
as soon as I hear someone's name, I can usually tell. It's quite easy. Like last names are a really big giveaway.
Mm,
My last name, not so much, because
okay.
it's Monaghan, which is a county in Ireland anyway, so
Mm,
I could be either. But there are certain ones, it's like like stereotypically ones like O'Hare, O'Reilly, like
yeah.
it's quite easy to tell. And obviously first names as well.
Mm,
Like Irish names are a really big thing. Unionists don't have Irish names. Like you're never gonna meet a Protestant unionist called Sinead. It's not gonna happen. But like if you have an Irish first name, you're probably a Catholic, or you're almost certainly a nationalist or a Catholic, one of the two.
mm.
Which is weird in Scotland because everybody has Irish names in Scotland. Like everybody's called Neve. Like I know so many Neves in Scotland, and you could not tell. I know Neve, and her mum is Italian, and I was like, I thought it was weird too. Her dad's Scottish, but her mum's family are Italian, and they said, oh, they just like the name, and I thought that's so strange.
So, like, Neve is not a Protestant name.
No, Neve is an Irish name.
Okay, and tend to be a Catholic name as well.
Yeah. So like any name that comes from the Irish language, they'll usually be a Catholic.
Mm,
So like a Sean or like an Owen or a Ewan, they're all really Irish names. Or like obviously there's more obvious ones like Dervla and Avine and all those, like you
mm,
usually can tell.
mm,
Or Kiva or something. Like you can tell usually.
mm. Most of the things that don't make any sense. Over the years, I saw so many Irish students here from both
Mm-hmm.
parts of Ireland. And I think these are the smartest kids. I mean, they are extremely kind. They're extremely, social, extremely, it's nice people, just nice people. And then, we saw history, and then that tells a different story. I mean,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I saw like the why history is problematic, like, because I mean, if you talk about 1960, like 69, 70, and how the British government got involved and
Yeah.
how, colluded with, like, local politics.
Yeah.
So lots of bad faith politics happened
Mm-hmm.
past. And I think there was no closure from those things.
No, well, that's the thing. Like, that's one of the biggest issues with Northern Ireland. Like, there isn't. We don't have, because at the end of apartheid, there was a truth commission.
Yeah, yeah.
Northern Ireland never had that. We never got a truth commission. Nobody really knows what's happened, and so
Mm,
all there is left to come back to are the stories your parents told you, or like the stories that your friends know, which usually comes from your community. So there are two different versions of history, and we have no real version of what actually happened. We just
mm,
have hearsay of one side says this, the other side says that. And
mm,
there's no way to tell what's true because no one wants to open that can of worms. No politician wants to touch the legacy of the Troubles. It is a poison chalice. You
mm,
will immediately lose your mandate if you touch legacy of the Troubles.
mm. When I was watching this film, Kenneth Branagh's, what's the film called? Belfast. Yeah, and you can see how he also bypassed the actual trouble. So soon he started telling his story rather than,
Well, that's the thing. Nobody talks about it. We don't. It's
mm,
not mentioned. It's something that we refer to every
mm,
so often. So no one in my generation actually knows anything about the Troubles at all. We don't know the
no,
facts. We
no,
don't know the history. We don't know why it happened. We just know the big things that actually occurred and
mm,
how that makes our community feel.
mm,
So like we're remembering history. We're remembering it through oral history, through being told it by our parents and our grandparents. We're not learning about it through facts. We're just learning about it through word of mouth, which of course is going to distort the story.
mm. And then, I found that Kenneth Branagh has got knighthood from the Queen. So, I mean, obviously, he didn't have any intention to explore the politics, explore, and also, like, what an opportunity, there to actually, educate. A film can make that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Powerful film. I mean,
like people would watch that. Because people don't want to watch documentaries. They don't. People my age don't want to watch it, but they would watch a movie. But I also think the problem is whenever you're talking about the Troubles, you're talking about the history of the governments and the IRA and the UDA and the army. You're not actually touching on like the everyday people who just were going about their lives as it occurred. So like there are three or four versions of the Troubles. There's the Unionist version of history, there's the Catholic version of history, there's the true version of history, and then there's just everybody living. Like everybody talks about, like everyone outside of Northern Ireland talks about the Troubles like it's this big defining thing that occurred, and for a large part it is because it informs our culture. But for most people outside of the big cities, you kind of just lived your life through it. Like the Troubles was sporadic violence. It was sporadic, very massive outbursts of violence. But for most people, they were just going about their business, living their lives. And obviously it still touched them. But I know that a lot of people, like a lot of people in my dad's generation, not my grandparents, because they grew up in the very beginning of the Troubles. So in my dad's generation, unless you were in the police or you were in the IRA or you were in the UDA, you were an active participant. You were just kind of going about your life every day. Every so often, like even today, every so often a bridge is closed because there's a bomb threat. It's just nobody really thinks anything of it. It's kind of just something that occurs. It occurs in my time. And when it does, you have to shut down the whole town because there's only two bridges to get in and out of where I live. And it's just an inconvenience. It's not like this big, massive thing that everybody gets really riled about, which probably tells me that history is moving on. We are moving on because whenever there's a bomb threat or like someone calls it in and there's that, we kind of just shrug our shoulders and go, oh, guess I'm not going to town today, or oh, that's going to make traffic a nightmare. Like it's so normal. Time has probably done that, like time and distance, where it has affected us, but it's affected us in a very roundabout way where it influences our culture and it influences like these unconscious biases that everyday people have. Of course, there's always outliers who are very passionate, and they're the people who are lighting the bonfires, and they're the people who are like calling into police stations saying there's bomb threats and stuff. But for most people, the Troubles affected us in a very unconscious way where we're just quite separated. But today, whenever violence happens, most of us are looking at the TV going, what's going on? Why are you doing that? That's silly. But again, nothing's going to change with politics, even though most people look at the violence and think it's stupid. Like, why, who is trying to bomb the police station in Enniskillen again? Why? You know, we're like, why? Because I remember I was about 16, I think, and there was an incident where people kept saying that they were posting bombs to prison. And it was on the news constantly. And I specifically remember sitting down at lunch one day with my friends, and one of them went, well, it's only a bomb threat. It's not a bomb. And I just thought, yeah, that is very typical of Northern Ireland. Because if it's a bomb threat, all of us are like, well, it's probably not. Like, it didn't go off. You know, like, everybody's fine.
Since you were post-conflict child, I mean, but at the same time, did you hear any gunshots in your lifetime?
No.
In memories, no.
No, none at all. Like in fairness, my dad had a gun, but that's because he was in the police. So
yeah,
like sometimes I'd come downstairs. He used to put it in really weird places. So obviously places where small children couldn't reach it. But like we have like a cereal cabinet, like in the kitchen, and he didn't bring it home very often. He usually left it at work. But say he was coming home from work, and then the next day he was going to Belfast. Belfast is the opposite way to where I live to my town, so he'd bring it home so he could go on up to Belfast. And it would just sit on the top shelf, like with the cereal. Like I just remember it being there one day and thinking, why is that in my kitchen? No, like I've never heard gunshots or anything like that.
But also you were growing up in a in a household where your parents are involved in that kind of profession.
Yeah, like
kind of normal setting, isn't it? No.
Yeah. So I feel like I obviously had a different view of it because my parents made certain that Sam and I didn't really know anything about it at all. I think because obviously dad did have quite a scary job.
mm,
So mom and dad made so certain that they didn't talk about politics at
mm,
home, and that like dad never mentioned if anything bad happened at work. Like I think both of them went out of their way not to talk to us about it. And
mm,
that's why I didn't really know anything about like the troubles or conflict until I was much older,
mm,
because it would have been a lot more real for me and my family because my dad was in the police. So it wouldn't have just been like a cultural thing for me. It would have been, oh, like I'm actually concerned.
mm,
Because like obviously like, whenever I was younger, a policeman got blown up in his car, and like police were getting shot, and obviously like police are getting attacked during the riots on the 12th and stuff. And like my dad was in the middle of all of that. Like he was right in the middle of all of that stuff. And lots of my family members were in the police. It's not just my dad
mm,
as
mm,
well. So my parents they didn't speak about it, and they made a very conscious decision not to mention it.
mm. I'm kind of aware of time. We'll take another 10 minutes maximum, okay? But I mean, one of the things I really want to tell, I mean, because we are teachers and some of the things really excite us, make us happy, like all the graduations picture. And I always tend to see them, and I think I saw one of your picture where you were with your dad.
Yeah.
And I kind of sense like how proud he is.
Yeah. He's
Um,
I think he's just really happy that both of us, because no one, my brother and me were the first two to go. Like no one like my uncle sort of went, but he kind of failed out. But I
mm,
think like dad was just so proud that both of us went, and I think he's just quite happy that we're both quite normal. Like we're just normal and we're happy and we're vaguely intelligent, and he's just,
mm, mm, But it showed, the how family can thrive, family can, live
yeah,
normal life, can actually, make good things for
yeah.
themselves, for the society, because it's not only like it's
Yeah,
not.
that's what I mean. It's like there's big politics. So there's the politics, the troubles, and there's the politicians, and there's everybody fighting and riots. And
Mm,
then there's just everybody kind of just going about their life and living normally and just,
mm, mm. But also I think the success story behind you is like your dad's proud moment is perhaps, the things he missed, perhaps through you,
mm,
that emancipation actually happened, Now we can move on beyond that story, that old story.
like I think a big part of it is obviously like he grew up right in the middle of the troubles, and then he went into the police, and like his other members of our family went into the police as well.
Mm,
Like Sam and I don't really have any affiliate. Like we've grown up in a time where there is no violence, there's no threat, and we're both very moderate, and we're both very just wanting to live our lives, and we don't really have any biases. And I think he's quite proud of that. That we're not
mm,
like preaching unionists. That we're just very
mm,
moderate, very even tempered. We just kind of want to get on and live our lives and just like be normal and try and get on with it. Like I think he's happy that like the troubles haven't like infected our household or our lives in a way that they probably did whenever he and mum were just like had just married, and obviously he was in the police and she was nursing.
mm, mm,
Like it was such a big part of their lives, but it's not a part of our lives at all.
mm, mm. So lots of things going on in their heads as well.
Mhm.
So it was not easy because that transition was not seamless. It was just done, like, yeah, deal with this.
Yeah.
Um, so I think lots of credits actually go to your parents as well, how they try to also, make peace with themselves and with their
Yeah.
kids.
Like they tried to move on, and I think that's why I feel the way I feel about Northern Ireland, and I am really moderate
Mm,
because they tried really hard to move on as well. And whenever it was all said and done and they'd voted yes for the Good Friday Agreement, that was it, that they'd made their peace with it. They said, right.
mm,
My brother at that point was, I think also part of it was my brother was born in 96. So he was born just before peace.
mm,
So they were already parents at that point, and I think they had decided, they were like, right, this is done. We
mm,
can't do this anymore. We need to just finish it. It needs to be over, and we need to like leave Belfast and leave that life behind.
Last 2 minutes. So you came to Dundee, you did well here. What would be advice for future students who are coming to Dundee or to any universities, especially from places like Northern Ireland? I mean, how they should approach their university life and can do actually well.
You just kind of have to get stuck in. Like you just have to join societies, like join a sport. That's what I did, and it made it easier. Like also, like I think if you go to Scotland, a lot of people are going to ask you about Northern Ireland, and a lot of people are going to make fun of it. And you just roll with the punches. Like you have to get in on the joke. You have to realize that where you come from is ridiculous. Like the situation in which we were raised and our country, it's weird, it's odd. People are going to laugh about it and people are going to make fun of it. And you just have to like let it go and you just have to get in on the joke and move on. You just have to be really open to meeting people and like different viewpoints, and like especially in Scotland where like obviously they've like if you're a nationalist in Scotland you have a strong view on Northern Ireland. You just have to, doesn't matter if they're wrong, just don't fight with them, it doesn't matter, just have fun.
Yeah, have fun. Yeah. Like for me, like this is my last thought about, the society. I mean, any society can be good as long as they provide all those good things, good political goods, which is like, schools, education, good housing, good streets, safe neighborhood, then I don't care what you want to call it. You can call it anything. I don't care. As long as they provide those things, something which is fair, which is equal, which is, which will not create like hierarchy where there will be no masters. Everything is like democratically processed, done, and everyone will have the benefit equally.
And I think like if you are from Northern Ireland and you're coming to university like in other places, just ask people questions. Like just ask them what they think, because the more you hear other people's perspectives, like the more you're gonna look at your own and think, okay, well maybe I am a bit biased. Like maybe this is wrong. Maybe I disagree with that. Like just ask people about it. Just talk to them and actually listen. Don't just don't just ask questions for the sake of talking back. Like actually listen to other people's viewpoints, because like that's the only way that like Northern Ireland's going to get on. And if you're from there, you're not used to hearing opposing viewpoints. Like just listen, just get stuck in, ask people what they think and actually listen to them.
But also like what I sense like throughout this talk today, I mean, there's a sense of hope there as well. You sound hopeful.
I am hopeful. It's getting better really slowly, far more slowly, and that's why I'm frustrated. But it is happening, and maybe not in 10 years or 20, but maybe in 50. Like maybe in 50, we won't be so entirely ruled by whatever ethnic group you belong to. Like that might not be such a big part of our lives anymore, and I don't think it will be. Like time moves on, like time heals all, and it will. But it will just take longer than most people would like.
And I think, that the freedom, emancipation, self-determination will come through your generation.
I think it will start with us. Like I think ours is the first generation that can really express, like that has the opportunity to look back at the troubles and say, no, this is wrong. We don't like this. We need to go somewhere else, because we're the only generation that doesn't have a real personal attachment to it in the way that we didn't know anybody in the troubles. We didn't see it. So it will begin with us. It won't end with us, but it will begin with us.
Thank you, Jayne.
No bother.
Thank you. You take care of yourself. So like, I mean, keep me posted about York, anything else. Give me a shout.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank
Cheers.
you for having me.
Bye.
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 Votre toast, je peux vous le rendre, Seigneur, Seigneur, car avec les soldats torero